Hello friends, this is PTNSHIFT, a generative music live performance system for developing, preparing and playing live shows. This video is a deep dive on how it works, but first here's a super quick overview. You've got two main modes. Note mode for exploring and generating and developing ideas. And then you've got session mode, which is where you take collections of curated patterns that you've developed in note mode, and you then play them back as part of a performance. These colored pads here are patterns, and you see the same thing in notes mode as well. Let's launch this one. So you can see here I've got a progression of a track here. So let's look at note mode here. I can just keep on iterating and developing patterns. Let's say, tweak this. Let's turn the space up. And I'll save this pattern by just hitting new. It adds this pattern to the top here. Let's say I'll make a bunch of other different modifications here. Let's mute the bass. Just add some drums. Add a new pattern, and let's drop the drums out and bring the bass in, and let's turn the tone of everything down. Add that as a pattern. So I've got three patterns here I've just added. I now want to make a collection out of these patterns to then perform them in a live situation. I hit the select button, select these three patterns, I hit convert, and it converts those three patterns to a collection in the session view. And that's how the workflow works between exploration mode here and then curating and laying things out ready to perform later. So sound comes from 6 generative synth engines that generates both patterns and sounds. And then you've got 2 effects, and you've got a master section, which includes multi-band compression and mixing and summing, and a mastering section, just so the music that comes out of PTNSHIFT sounds ready to go. I've been building live electronic performance instruments for a bit over 20 years now. My previous instruments focused on improvisational live sampling and effects processing. And that approach is awesome, but starting from a complete blank slate for every show is also terrifying and exhausting and leads to quite unpredictable results. So on the other hand, I'm not really into doing live sets based around launching clips in a predetermined order or deconstructing finished tracks to somehow shoehorn them into a live show. I've always really loved the way that Autopilot do their live shows. They seem to have a generative system with a palette of broad compositional themes which can be combined and sequenced flexibly, so each performance is different. And this kind of gives them the best of both worlds. It gives them a way to plan and prepare material and a way to perform it. So this is the idea behind PTNSHIFT. It's my own take on an Autopilot approach to live generative music performance. PTNSHIFT is the sister of Scapeshift, which is a generative composition tool that I launched late last year. It uses the same engine and the pattern presets are compatible and shareable between them. But PTNSHIFT has this brand new performance-oriented hardware interface. PTNSHIFT is built for Ableton Push 2 in Native Instruments Reactor, and it comes with a companion app for capturing an area of the Reactor interface and displaying it on the Push 2 screen. So this was built by an amazingly talented Patreon patron of mine called Nicholas Bergius. The plan is to, at some point, open source this app. I think there should be more apps, basically, for this really great hardware platform. I don't have any affiliation with Ableton, I just think this is really great, and I would love to see more people building cool stuff for this. As of shooting this video, macOS support for the companion app is complete, and Windows is nearly complete. but do check in the description for the latest updates on support and compatibility. Also, the internet tells me that push 3 is backwards compatible with anything built for push 2, but due to some bad stuff that happened in the last couple of years, I can't really afford one and I don't have the space for one, so I haven't had a chance to test it yet. Again, this might have changed by the time you watch this, so check in the description for updates on that. Before we fully dive in, I just want to give a brief overview of roughly how to get this set up. So first, make sure you have Native Instruments Reactor installed. Make sure your Ableton Push 2 is connected. Open Reactor. Set your latency to something quite high. I'd recommend 1024 samples. You could probably get away with 512, but PTNSHIFT does a lot of real-time event processing. Anything less than that, and you can often get glitches. So I'd recommend at least 512, if not 1024. In File, Audio and MIDI settings in Reactor, go to the MIDI settings and make sure that you've got at least one of the Ableton Push ports enabled, both for the input and the output. You might need a bit of trial and error with this, because I've learned from some people that have been testing it that it's actually a little bit different for everybody's system. But the way I've got this set up is I've just got the Ableton Push live port to set to on the input, and Ableton Push live port set to on the outputs. Unzip and launch the PTNSHIFT companion app and go through the various hoops that you might have to go through depending on whether you're on macOS or Windows. Turn on capture in the companion app, and again you might have to set some privacy settings to give it permission to capture your screen. Nicholas is working on auto detection for the window, so by the time you're watching this video, the app might actually just automatically detect this window. But if not, move the Reactor window around until the push screen aligns with the capture area. You can also change the XY values in the capture app. Okay, let's dive in. So we're in this kind of screensaver mode right now, which is this kind of like multi-band spectral analyzer thing. Just tap one of the knobs to get back to the main interface. You've got two main areas. This upper area here for controlling the parameters, and this lower area down here for controlling the patterns. You've also got some global controls. So up here, you've got the master level. This knob here is the tempo. And down here you've got a play button. Just hit that to start and stop playback. When PTNSHIFT is stopped, you can start playback by launching a pattern. And if you want to stop playback, you just stop it with the play button. Up here behind the setup button, you've got access to tooltips and tutorials. Just hit the button and it'll launch a tooltip for the most recent function that you've just used. And then if you use other functions while you've got the tooltips active, then they'll show up here as well. To dismiss a tooltip, just hit setup while it's flashing, then it goes back to the main screen. And then if you want to turn off tooltips altogether, just hit setup, and that means you won't be launching tooltips all the time every time you do something. Okay, let's look at parameter controls. So you've got 8 engine pages and their selector buttons. This is for tweaking the individual engines. You've got a browse page. This is for tweaking global parameters, such as these macros, which change all of the engines all at once. And then you've also got some global functions here like tune. And you've got a device page. This is for tweaking similar parameters across the individual engines. So let's say here I can go to tone. I'll turn the tone of the bass down. I'll turn the tone of the drums up. Turn the tone of the delay and the reverb up. And then you've got mix, where you've got access to the individual levels of each of the engines and the mutes. Every page except for the mix page has subpages. Flip to pages with the shortcut buttons here. Many of these pages have more than 8 individual pages, so you can access all of these pages with this knob here. So the engine page buttons have additional functionality. As you can see, when I go into the drum page here, these lock icons appear next to all the other engines. That's because when you've got an engine selected, it locks out the parameters for all the other engines. That means that you can do fun, interesting things like just switch the drums. So I'm launching different patterns here, but it's only recording the drum element of that pattern. So when I go back from the drum page back to the browse page, what I can do here is then individually lock these engines. So I can say, let's say I want to lock out drums, bass and lead and the master, but let the other ones change. So I can now So this has a whole ton of really creative applications. And if you want to get rid of these locks at any point, just hit the stop clip button and then it unlocks everything. We'll come back to the individual engines later, but now let's look at the pattern controls. So a quick recap of the overview. You've got note mode for exploring and session mode for performing. Note mode is an infinite, ever-growing bank of patterns, and this is a place where you can explore, develop ideas, just chuck it all down. It's like an infinite journal of ideas that you can always have access to, always browse through, always use to kind of mine for new material, etc. So you scroll it with the touch strip here, and also these up and down buttons. And you can see the pages are broken up into pages of 64. It does this, PTNSHIFT does this automatically just to help you identify where things are. And when you scroll, you can see an overview of the patterns on the screen up here, including a page number. So colors are kind of semi-randomly allocated just to, again, to help you kind of identify patterns and remember where things are if you're, triggering different patterns inside one of these pages. These 8 buttons to the right-hand side are shortcut buttons. So let's say I want to remember this position here. I'll just hold this button down here. I've now created a shortcut. I can scroll away from it, hit that button again, takes me back to that shortcut position. Right, let's look more at creating patterns and collections. So we can create a new pattern with the new button. Let's create a variation here. That's fun. Save that pattern by just hitting the new button. Adds it to the top of the list. So again, to select patterns, we just tap all the patterns that we want to include in our collection. You can also deselect patterns and reselect them, and it launches the pattern while you're selecting as well, just so you can remember which patterns you're actually selecting for your collection. So when you're happy with it, just hit convert, turns it into a collection on your session page. So if you want to add another pattern to a collection, let's go back to note mode Let's say we'll make what we're going to do here. Put like that. Add that new pattern. Select that pattern, and we could select more patterns we want. Let's select that pattern as well. And here we just hit duplicate, and it goes back to this collection here, but we've now added these two patterns. Okay, deleting things. So first, a bit of a confession. I made a kind of root level error with how I built the data structures for note mode. So although it's possible in theory to delete a pattern from note mode, it actually completely breaks all the data in session mode. So for now, unfortunately, you can't delete patterns from note mode, but I guess that's kind of okay because this is just this is like a stream of consciousness. Think of it like Jack Kerouac writing on baking paper, so he didn't have to like break the page. So this isn't really designed for curating. But in session mode, you can delete things. To delete a pattern, firstly make sure that you don't have any collection selected, because if you do, it'll delete your collection, and you probably don't want that to happen as well. The way to see this is up here on the screen. It will tell you which collection you have currently selected. And so obviously we have collection 16 collected. Deselect that, and then it'll go and say, and then it will say notes. And that means that we've got note mode selected, and that's what you want, because obviously it's not going to delete note mode. Once you've got that set, then select the pattern you want to delete, which, let's delete that one, and just hit delete, pattern disappears. So to delete a collection, select the collection, hit delete, collection disappears. Right, let's look at the action bar. So at the top of each collection and at the top of notes mode is an action bar. And the action bars contain all of your tools for launching, combining, and morphing patterns. As previously seen, this left button is the selector. Select this if you want to delete a collection, or if you want to add a new pattern to a collection from note mode, and there's some other uses which will become apparent as I explain the rest of the functions in the action bar. So the yellow button switches between max mode, which is the mode we're in now, while it's bright and yellow and flashing, and velocity mode. So this controls the behavior of the pattern pads when you hit them. In max mode, when the yellow light is bright and flashing, hitting a pattern pad will fully recall that pattern. So if I jump to say this pattern here, fully recalls those patterns. In velocity mode, when that's turned off, tapping a pattern pad will partially recall a pattern depending on the velocity with which you hit that pad. So you can do a little tiny combination of this pattern. So you can see it's already got some elements of this pattern. Let's tap it again lightly. And again. And again. 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 So it's fully recalled. Let's go full pattern recall, max mode, velocity mode. So So this is really useful for giving you kind of surprising halfway patterns between like completely different patterns. It's probably more one for note mode for when you're exploring things, to help you get, you know, different new ideas. But also, I mean, it could be a cool thing to use live if you want to just like throw a bit of a wild card into whatever's going on right now. Okay, let's go back to this. So the pink button launches a theme based on the patterns in the collection belonging to this pink button. This is nice for getting little variations in between patterns that you've already got in a collection. So this is basically a randomized combination of the parameters in the patterns in the collection. The theme button also obeys the velocity max mode. So if you want just a subtle variation, that was very subtle, just to like shake it up a little bit, you could turn on velocity mode and just lightly tap the theme button. In notes mode, the theme button applies to all of the patterns that you've got in your journal. So it can be a little bit more wild and chaotic. So we're in velocity mode now, so I'm just going to give this a little tap. Okay, that was quite wild. The really nice thing, well, the thing that I really like about the theme button is that it's generating new ideas, but it's generating them from the material that you have created already. So it's all kind of like within your creative style, but it just like adds wildcard combinations of things that you've already created. So here's a good point to talk about the undo functionality. So down here, the page left, page right buttons. Page left is undo. So you've got a full history of all the actions that you've taken, such as randomizations or pattern recalls. The blue button in the action bar is blend mode. So when it's active, bright and flashing, the pattern pads become selectors, and it allows you to select a destination as your blend destination. So in blend mode, touch the touch strip, starting at the bottom, and then move it to the top to blend to the new pattern. And you can blend backwards and forwards, you can keep moving as long as you like. And then wherever you lift off, that becomes the new current playing pattern. Let's go back to this pattern. And you can do this, fully recall that. So you can do this with like the most completely different patterns in there. So let's go back to our friend up here. Select this pattern here, select blend, select this, the blend destination. And then all the way back. So again, like a lot of these functions, it's kind of got some applications for notes mode when you're exploring ideas, because it allows you to find interesting midpoints between patterns. And then in session mode, it's also quite handy for like performing an evolving arrangement through a collection of patterns. So you've heard a few of these patterns already, but what I could do, for example, is go into blend mode, blend to that pattern, blend to that pattern, blend to that pattern, that pattern. etc, etc. You get the picture. The next 4 white buttons are for wander mode. So wander mode is basically a kind of autopilot that continually shifts through combinations of parameters from the patterns in a collection, or if you're in notes mode, all the patterns in your notes bank. So you've got 4 different speeds: glacial, slow, medium, or fast. And you activate wander mode by just tapping one of the speed buttons. When you tap these buttons, you see the wander animation appear on the screen up here. It's kind of like HAL 9000 style funny glyph thing. And then you deactivate wander mode by just tapping the same speed button again. So I'll put in fast wander. So you can also change the collection that it's wandering from in real time, and I just do that by hitting the select button, and it starts wandering to patterns in this collection here. Let's slow the wander down a little bit, so it's a little bit more chill. So while it's wandering, you can still use pretty much all the other features. For example, you can recall a pattern to kind of snap it back to that pattern and let it then wander off from it. You can use the macro knobs. Let it wander away from that. And also in note mode, you can add new patterns while it wanders. So this is something I do quite a lot actually, which is just like put it in wander mode, particularly in notes mode, where it's wandering through all the patterns that I've ever created, and just sit back and listen to what it's doing, and then occasionally it'll land on something that's like, oh, that's pretty cool. And when I do that, I just hit new, and it adds that pattern, which I can then turn off wander mode, go into that pattern, work into it, and tweak it. Also, just like everything else, wander obeys the locks here. So let's say you just want it to wander through drums, just go into the drums engine in wander mode, and it'll just wander through different drum variations, and it'll leave everything else the same. So let's say, let's find something that's got some nice, well actually let's go into session view. Oh, let's just, like this one. Go back to note mode, go to drums, put it in fast wander, and just listen to it wandering through various different drum patterns while everything else stays the same. Okay, so that is all the pattern controls. Let's stop wandering around and look at the engines. So yeah, you've got 6 generative engines, 2 effects, and the master channel. So each generator engine has a parametric pattern generator and a sound generator. The parametric way that the pattern generators work is kind of the core concept behind PTNSHIFT, because it's what allows you to morph seamlessly from any pattern to any other pattern, to crossbreed patterns, create themes, wander, and all of that stuff. So rather than creating patterns by entering individual notes or turning on steps in a step sequencer, you create them by dialing up parameters. And these parameters can then change continuously to create morphing musical structures. And on top of this, the sound engines are deeply integrated into the pattern generation, so every parameter can be modulated by its own pattern generator, which leads to some pretty wild articulations of the sound. So I'll go through how this works for each of the engines. Let's start with the drums. Okay, so in one of these patterns, I prepared a stripped down 4/4 kick pattern to show you the principles of how the pattern generators work. Okay, here we go. So let's go into the drum engine, and then let's go to kick pattern. So the drum generators have an A pattern and a B pattern, and it switches between these patterns partway through the bar. So here I can see the A-B split, and so you can change the point in the bar at which it changes from pattern A to pattern B. So right now I've got A1 a cycle of 4, that's 4/16, and B1 has got a cycle of 4/16. So I change the cycle of A1, you can see it's now 3/16, so we go dun dun dun, boom, A, B, A, B. Let's change the split point. And each cycle, A and B, has a second subcycle. So let's say I'll put the A2 cycle down at 1, introduce a little bit of level, and you can hear that's going. And now let's change the B cycle, maybe to 5. Then each of these cycles has an offset. So let's dial it back to a simple 4/4 kick again. So that's now got an offset of 1. That's a basic principle. There's a huge amount that you can achieve in terms of different rhythmic variations by messing around with these different parameters. So I'd really encourage you to just dive in, mess around, see what you can do with these various different patterns. But now I want to, let's dial this back. Actually, yeah, I like that rhythm. So we've dialed that back. And now I want to show you the sound parameters. So all of the drum engines are synths. So they've got parameters you can tweak. You've got 6 parameters for each engine. So I've got length, pitch, and I've got snap, which is a kind of attack. So I can make it a duller kick. Thud, which gives you that kind of like thump in the chest. Then you've got boom, which is a kind of like the long decay at the end. You turn the boom down, it's just like flat, sort of flat pitch. It falls down to a flat pitch really quickly. And then you've got saturation. And each of these sound engine parameters, you can modulate those with the pattern generator. So with the pitch, I'm going to turn up the pitch modulation amount. Actually, I'm going to turn up the length so you can hear it a bit more clearly. I'm going to change the cycle. Pitch cycle of 5. So you can hear the pitch modulating over the pattern. I can do that with length. I'll do that with snap. And then let's do this with saturation. So you can get some really expressive patterns. This is just by modulating the kick sound over the length of the pattern. And you can do this with the snare, you can do this with the hats, the clap, and the percussion. And you can get some really wild variations. Okay, let's go back to a straight kick. And I now want to show you the bass. So somewhere here we go. I've created this kind of starter pattern. And you can see we've just got 16th notes on a single pitch, and you can see these notes going through here on the display. So I'm going to scroll to the pitch page, and I can just play the pitch manually. Let's dial it back down to there. But now I'm going to introduce some pitch automation. That's pretty cool. And now I'm going to tweak the pattern. So this is pattern 33. So neighbouring patterns sound quite similar to their neighbours. So when you're morphing through, when you're scrolling through these different patterns, there's a sense of kind of continuity between each individual pattern. Okay, and then I can change the length of those notes. And obviously if you turn the length up beyond a certain way, then it ends up slurring everything. And you can do some cool tricks here, like if I turn up the length modulation amount, then I can get these nice kind of tied acid bass lines. All right, let's go back to that. Okay, so cadence and offset. So this affects the rhythm. So if I turn the cadence up here, I'm now 8 notes, 3/16, etc. So that's really kind of cool. And then the offset is just, yeah, the offset within the bar. as with all the parameters, you can then modulate these. To get even more interesting rhythms. That's cool, I like that. And then on this page, you've got velocity, so I can manually turn the velocity down. And then again, introduce some modulation. So already beginning to breathe a bit of life into this pattern. So now let's go and mess around with the filter cutoff. So classic filter knob. Everybody loves a filter knob. So again, as with everything, I can add modulation to the cutoff, and I can change the pattern of that. Do the same with the resonance. Okay, now I'm going to mess around with the oscillator. So a quick overview of the architecture of this synth. So it's a two-voice, it's a two-oscillator monosynth. Oscillator 1 is just a simple waveform. You can select. You can select the waveform from sine through triangle to square to saw. And then oscillator 2 is where all the fun happens. And it's a hard synced FMable oscillator, so it's actually got its own FM source built into oscillator 2, so you can get lots of cool, just pretty wild sounds. So let's change the pitch. So we've got that nice kind of hard sync sound coming in. And as with everything, I can modulate. I can modulate the oscillator 2 pitch. Now each of these parameters has another modulation source, so it's actually got a modulation envelope. So I'm going to turn that up. And I'm going to modulate that with its own pattern-based modulation. In fact, let's go to the mod envelope here. So we've got that's a decay, and let's modulate the decay time over the pattern. Right, let's do some FMing. Let's turn up the FM amount. Let's modulate that. And let's change the FM pitch. In fact, let's modulate that over the pattern. And then let's modulate. Let's mess around with the filter envelopes. So, oh, that's nice. Now let's add some pattern modulation to that. Oh, that's nice. And let's add some pattern modulation to the attack. Yeah, so with all the pattern-based modulation, you can really get these engines to funk and groove. Okay, so I'm going to cheat slightly here because the lead is actually pretty much exactly the same as a bass engine. So you've had a walkthrough already of how the bass engine works, and it's pretty much the same. I mean, there's a few parameters that are slightly different. The way it manages the bass from the bass is slightly different, so it's got a very slightly different sound, but it's pretty much exactly the same engine. But now I want to dive into the polysynth. So here's a really simple polysynth pattern. Again, like the bass, it's triggering on 16ths. Let's go and mess around with the pitch. And let's dial in some pattern modulation for the pitch. Mess around with the cadence. That's cool. Quick overview of the architecture of the polysynth. So it's a 2-oscillator FM synth with an additional noise generator, and the noise generator can itself be an FM source, and the FM can feedback, so you can do feedback FM between the two oscillators, which leads to some pretty kind of chaotic and cool sounds. So let's go and mess around with oscillator 1 envelope. Actually, no, quickly before this, I just want to mess around with the chords a bit first. So you can see that this is triggering multiple notes. You can set the number of notes here, I think up to about 8 notes at the same time, and you can change the spread as well. In fact, and let's turn up the release on the envelope. I'm just going to turn down the filter on the bass a bit, just so we can hear a bit more of what's going on. Yeah, that gives us a bit more space for the polysynth. Okay. So these are just sine waves basically, and like everything I can introduce some pattern modulation. Right, let's introduce some FM. So that's oscillator 2. FM, okay, that's some 2-to-1 FM. Let's give it some pattern modulation. Go back to oscillator 2. Right, you can continuously change the pitch of oscillator 2 relative to oscillator 1, so you can get some nice enharmonic stuff. And of course, like everything, you can give it some pattern modulation. Right, let's go back to the FM, and now let's introduce some So we've got some 2-to-1 modulation going on, and let's give it some 1-to-2 modulation. And this is where it gets really chaotic. Right, let's add in some pattern modulation for oscillator to envelope. So yeah, some pretty wild and twisted sounds already. Right, let's introduce some noise. Levels up, I think the filter's down. What's the noise envelope doing? So the noise filter has a resonant bandpass on it. And you can modulate that with the pattern, like everything. And in the FM controls, here's noise FM, yeah. So you can FM oscillator 1 with the noise. Now you can also take the noise down, so the actually direct noise level down. So you're only hearing the noise showing up through the FM. And when you turn the resonance up, again you get some kind of nice chaotic sounds there. Bring the decay back down. And you can get, under certain conditions, you can get some quite nice sort of almost like Rhodesy sounds with it. Anyway, there we go. Brief overview of the Polysynth. Now let's look at the Resonator. Okay, so here's a pattern I made earlier, which is a great starting point to demonstrate the Resonator. So the Resonator it's actually an effect, really. It's basically 4 tuned comb filters with a second low pass modulatable filter after it. So let's start by looking at the chord. We've got the bass, which is like the bass pitch of the chord. We've then got the spread. Turn the spread of the notes in the chord. And then we can set a cycle length, which we can then use to modulate the bass. And then we can modulate the spread as well. This gives you a nice kind of moving chords. Okay, let's look at the resonators. So let's turn the damp down, the damping control, so this is going to make it brighter. Turn up the feedback, which makes it longer, denser. Turn up the high pass, which cuts out some of the low frequency material. Then let's dial in some FM, which basically frequency modulates the comb filters at the pitch of the comb filters. Okay, let's have a look at the filter. So you've got cutoff, resonance, the classics, and then you've got these envelopes, which are actually triggered from the drum triggers. So right now, the kick is negatively triggering the filter. So as I turn the amount of modulation up, I can hear the envelope kind of like rising up after the kick, and then if I put the kick up like that, then you can hear it goes down from the kick. And then here you've got the filter envelopes. I can change it down to K. I can change it down to tax, so let's go back to the resonators, bring back the feedback. Etc. So there's a whole bunch of other parameters in here that you can use to get lots of different effects with the resonators, and they really respond well to the different material that you give them. So right now this is being sent material from the bass. Oh, let's send it from the Polysynth as well. Turn the resonator up. So in the Polysynth, let's go back to the pitch. More feedback. Turn up this resonator send from Poly. In fact, let's turn the dry signal down. So these are all pre-fade. The sends are all pre-fade, so you can just have like pure send and no original signal. So you can get some really nice effects by combining these engines with the resonator. Okay, let's look at the noise generator. Okay, so you can hear actually already the noise generator is going through the resonator. Let's dial this back a little bit. Let's calm this resonator down. Let's go with the filter. Okay. So the noise generator is basically a fairly simple granular engine with some field recordings, and I've just got it set on this 8th note pattern. Let's look first at the envelopes. So increase the K, increase the release. Increase the attack. And like everything, let's introduce some pattern modulation. And let's look at some of the sample parameters. So you basically got two sample parameters. You've got the start point here, so you can modulate the start point, and then you've got the sample select here, so you can select. So let's give some pattern modulation to the start point. filter. So you've got some very gentle filter effects here. This is just really for kind of like, it's not really for any shaping purposes, it's more just to kind of like constrain the frequency spectrum that the noise is occupying. So you've got a high pass here, which is quite nice if you want to create some sort of interesting, almost hi-hat like patterns. You've got a saturator, and then you've got this bias effect, which kind of like crunches things up a bit, which can be quite nice. And let's go back to the Reso sends. Let's send a bunch of this. In fact, let's just trigger the resonator with the noise generator. Whole load of fun that you can have here with the noise generators and the resonator. Okay, reverb. Let's go to the reverb sends, turn everything down for starters, and then let's turn up the reverb in the mix. Send some resonator to the reverb. So again, all the sends are pre-fade, so you can do fun things like turning all the sends up and then turning the sources down in the mix. So you can get these big kind of washed out textures. So you've got high damping. Obviously the more damping you've got, the less high frequency you have. You've got low damping, and if you take the low damping down, it can become this absolutely huge kind of juggernaut sausage of noise, but it's quite nice to dial up the low damp and the high damp. You've got size. Like small up here, or fast reverb, to gargantuan down there. You've got diffusion, so at this end it basically operates more like a delay. And because of the way that I built the interpolation of the diffuser delays, it's got quite a grainy sort of digital sound to it when you tweak the sides, which I quite like. I mean, you know, it's each to their own taste, but I'm kind of into it. Okay, let's look at the delay. Let's turn the reverb down in the mix, turn the delay up. Let's have a look at the sends. What have we got? Oh, everyone's going to the delay. Tell you what, let's just do it with just the bass. So that's just the bass. Okay, so there's quite a few controls that you can get your hands on with the delay here. You've basically got 2 delays, a long delay and a short delay, and then you've got a filter which is actually it's 2 filters. It's a resonant high pass and a resonant low pass. So it kind of works like a dub delay, but there's a lot of different effects that you can achieve with this. So first of all, let's dial up the filter. On the short delay, dial back the diffusion and the delay time. So you can get positive feedback as well that really kind of howls around in this sort of dub delay screech. Got a wobble for the delay, which kind of gives it a bit of sort of tape delay kind of feel to it. Let's change this cut off. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of fun to be had with this delay. Modulate the filter, and you can give the filter a spread between the left and the right channel. Turn up the resonance. Turn up the feedback. The way I designed it is so when you've got more resonance, it brings the feedback back. So it makes it's actually a bit more, it just makes it a bit more controlled. That's all I'm saying. Then you've got an envelope follower on the filter as well. So with a short delay, you can actually diffuse it, and so it almost sounds a bit like a flanger or a chorus. Anyway, you can really get lost in this filter. I mean, there's a huge amount you could do with just like a kick drum, some bass, and the delay line for a really kind of stripped down sort of acid, dubby wig out. Right, okay, finally we have the master section. So first I'm going to recall a pattern that I had going earlier. Okay, yeah, sounds quite fun. Help demonstrate what's going on with the master. Okay, so in master you've basically got 2 main areas to control. One of them is the scale map and the pitch map, and the other one is all the kind of mixing and mastering stuff, right? Dynamic summing, multiband compression, saturation, tape effects, etc. Okay, so here we've got 12 tone and snap to scale on. Let's turn those off. I just tap the buttons, and now we're kind of like harmonically completely off-piste. We can actually change the number of notes per octave. So So we can get some really kind of like enharmonic spectral stuff going on here. So obviously normally you have 12 notes per octave. We can have anything up to 32 notes per octave. So you get some really kind of enharmonic effects here. But let's dial this back to something normal. That's back in the key. So on this next page, you've basically got this harmonic sequencer. You can set a chord progression or like a harmony progression of up to 4 different harmonies. Here's the way you set the number of stages. It's set to 1 right now. So we're basically in F minor with 5 notes in the scale. We can introduce more notes in the scale. If we want to, let's keep it back from 5. But let's introduce another note. Well, tell you what, let's go to E minor, because that's going to be really obvious when you hear that change. And we set the stages to 2. So you can hear it going between F minor and E minor. But let's keep it on 1 chord for now. Okay, so dynamic summing. It's a bit of a tricky one to explain this. It's hard, like you really... What it does basically is it carves out space for all the different elements in a mix. The effect can be quite subtle, but if you turn it off, you'll just generally... Basically the mix is just a bit more sludgy, and everything is kind of competing for space a bit more. If you turn it up, it just... Yeah, without going deep into the DSP behind this, it just really helps kind of like clean up the mix. And you can set the amount that each like bus is affected by this. I sometimes like to turn the drums amount down, because it helps the drums like really punch through, because they're not like competing with anything else for space like they always dominate. And then you can also dial up the amount for each band as well. I find that it's most effective in the low and low mid, because it really helps. Like if you've got competing subtones, let's say the drums and the bass have got like competing tones in the subs, it really helps clear that up. And the same for the low mid. But you can often get away with dialing it down for the high mids. And so this is the final page in the mastering section. You've basically got a multi-band limiter, an OTT. I like to have that up quite high, it just kind of gives everything a nice presence. You can set the release time of the duck circuit, which you can basically you can duck things to the kick. And this just sets the release time of the ducking. And then you've got these like tape effects, kind of like tape wow. So if you turn this up, when the wow speed's low, it's kind of subtle. And you turn the wow speed up, it basically goes all the way up to like completely chewed up cassette vibes. But I quite like to just have a little bit of this. Again, it just gives it a little bit of like warmth. And then finally you've got tape saturation. I'd say like under halfway just gives it a bit of warmth, and you can dial it up so it really kind of starts to shred it. Okay, so that is everything. That's all the engines covered. That's all the parameter controls, pattern controls. So this should give you everything you need to really get deep into pattern shift, crafting your own patterns, crafting your own style, and building up your material ready to do live performances with pattern shift. Let's have a quick look at the software interface. So a few things to note: that the software displays a much kind of like richer display of all the parameters for each of the engines above the display. It can be handy to like go from working inside the interface and working in the hardware. These knobs are all kind of linked, so if you use pitch up here, you see it move there, and you can use the dial as well. If you're deep into kind of like pattern generation land, it does often help to actually have the software interface. And when you don't have any of the engines selected, it also shows you the pads, and these pads are actually clickable. So as I mentioned earlier in the video, pattern shift patterns are cross-compatible with Scapeshift, and now I'll show you how to share patterns from pattern shift to Scapeshift. So firstly, you need to select a collection. Yeah, let's go for this one. Let's go for this collection here. So I hit the export button. Here it says import export to Scapeshift. Hit export. And then following the instructions on this page, basically what you need to do is right click this event table, go to File, Save Table Data As, give it a name, let's say pattern shift vid test. Now you need to close pattern shift and load Scapeshift, and you'll be able to then import those patterns into Scapeshift. And exactly the same thing works in reverse. Inside Scapeshift, you'll be able to export a preset, and the file that it exports, you can then import into pattern shift. And to do that, hit the import button, and you just drag and drop that file onto here. And when you've done that, all the patterns in that Scapeshift preset will appear at the top of your journal, and you'll be able to then make collections out of it. You can also export and import your entire bank of patterns from and to pattern shift. So this is really handy for, for example, like backing up your patterns, or let's say sharing with a friend who's also got pattern shift. And it's something that I'm planning to do. Is obviously I'm going to be doing live shows with this at some point, and my plan is to share the pattern banks of the live sets when I've done them. So yeah, I'm quite excited that these pattern banks are going to be shareable and interoperable. And finally, a quick note on how to set up MIDI mode in pattern shift. So inside each engine is a MIDI icon. Tap this to turn this engine into a MIDI generator that sends MIDI out to external devices. And so every engine's got this, from the drums to the bass to the lead, etc. But there's something that you need to take care of to make this work properly. Flip open edit mode, go to new, pattern shift, GUI, parameter manager, and here you see an instrument called push mapping. So right now I've got this set up to receive from all devices and to send to all devices. And this is basically because I've learned that everybody's system is slightly different. So I had to set it up in this very generic way. But if you want to use MIDI mode, what you'll need to do is go and select the Ableton Push 2 input port and the Ableton Push 2 output port. to make sure that the MIDI data from the push mapping is only being sent to the push. Otherwise, you're going to have an absolute fire hose of MIDI events being sent to your devices, and there's about 3,000 events being sent per second. So it's a lot. And then, of course, up in the file menu, go to Audio MIDI settings, and in here you can then enable your various other MIDI output devices. From that point, you can then go back into the panel, turn on MIDI mode, and set up your devices, and there'll be the instruments that you want to send MIDI to will be able to receive MIDI without receiving that extra fire hose of data that is meant only for the Ableton push. Okay, that is everything. If you've made it to the end, massive well done to you. This has been epic. PTNSHIFT and Scapeshift are both available on my Patreon store. The link is in the description, and you can also get a discount if you pick them both up at the same time. There's a nice little bundle, super discount, yes. So yeah, thanks so much for tuning in. Please do subscribe for more vids about Scapeshift, about PTNSHIFT, and a whole bunch of more projects to come soon. See you around.